Well, welcome to Wyoming Armory, right here in the heart and soul of American Vintage Firearms, Cody, Wyoming. Now today I'm going to try to answer a question that I get asked all the time. And that's, why does it cost so much to have one of these old firearms restored? And, well, there's a real easy answer to that, and that's, you get what you pay for. Now, you can have a gun, take it down to your local gunsmith, have them take it apart, buff the heck out of the metal parts, throw them in a bluing tank, put a little varnish on the stocks, throw it all together and call it a restoration. Now, to me that's a refinish, and it's not going to look anything like what an original looked like. But if you've got a collectible firearm or a family heirloom that you want restored back to the specifications that it was built in the late 18th or early 19th century, it is a painstaking process and an expensive one. Now, I think there's a misnomer out there that those of us in the restoration business are just gouging the heck out of the general public when you bring us a firearm, and that couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, we really work at trying to keep the costs down and to be able to make the process less expensive and pass that on to our customers. But it is a process that is expensive, and so today we're going to take you through kind of step by step the process that we go through and what the costs are involved, both in some of the parts and the labor that go into a correct restoration of a vintage firearm. So let's use a rifle just like this one as a hypothetical case for what it may cost to restore a rifle just like this. This one's of course an 1886 Winchester original. Not a lot of special order features, just plain wood, 4590, which is a great caliber. It does have a Model 21 receiver sight. Let's see, you can see that there. But like 86s from that vintage did have a case hardened receiver, and that was the standard finish on the rifles at that time. So let's go over to chalkboard and work this thing up and just see how much we could expect a correct restoration like this one on a beautiful vintage firearm like this would cost. Okay, so let's start adding up the cost of this restoration. And remember, this is an 1886 with a case colored receiver, so we're going to go with the color case hardening here at Wyoming Armory for the whole set. Now, it's not just the receiver that gets color case hardened. We've got the hammer, the lever, butt plate, nose cap, and presently we're at $330. Now, if it's a blued receiver and it needs lever and hammer, then of course a whole lot less for that. Okay, now we're going to have to blue the barrel and mag tube. Barrel and mag tube on these would, to be correct for a restoration and not just a refinish, would be rust blue. So our rust blue is at $275. Okay, and that's probably not enough considering what all is involved in rust blue and the fact that you can go as many as 10 cycles to get through it, but that's our cost. So we see we're a little over $600 there. There's some miscellaneous bluing. The bolt has to be blued, the screws, things like that. We're about another $50 there. So we're, what is that for complete restoration quality metal finish? We're at, what is that, $605 if my math's correct. Okay, so you start to see it, the metal finish portion of this is pretty reasonable considering rust blued barrel and mag tube and color case hardened parts and a little bit of miscellaneous blue. That's not a lot of money. Okay, now if this is a restoration, of course we're going to have new wood. You know, if it's just a refinish wood's a whole different story, but wood is, if we're going to make it look new again, it's almost impossible wood on a firearm that's been used much, and of course you're not going to restore a super high condition firearm, so we're going to need to have some new wood on on a full-on restoration, and that's about $275. Oops, $275. And now, again, if it's a full-on restoration, almost never do we get a gun in to restore that has a perfect bore. You know, we can refinish the outside of a barrel, but the inside is almost always, particularly in earlier guns, has at least frosting in the grooves, and if not, full-on pitting. So we're gonna have to put a new barrel on. Now, if it's just a refinish where you've got a decent barrel and you're not going the full route of a restoration, then that's a different story. So with a barrel, now I know there's an outfit that sells barrels for in the $500–600 range, but those are not restoration quality barrels, and I'm not trying to put those guys down. They make a darn decent shooter quality barrel, but they're not quality enough for a restoration. And I did an episode where I talked about that. You can look that up if you'd like to. But you know, to get a restoration quality barrel, we can get a blank, get it profiled correctly, stamped, chambered, threaded, the whole 9 yards, dovetails cut for, I'm going to say on the top end about $1,000, and it depends on the profile. A round barrel's a little bit cheaper, octagon's more expensive to profile, half octagon's even a little more, but just we'll plug in 1,000, and it could be less depending on the barrel. Okay, so here's where we're at for metal finish and parts. And of course, if there's some kind of damage to the gun and something's not working properly, or we've got a broken or worn part, you know, we're going to replace that while we're doing the restoration, and usually that's a fairly minor cost compared to the rest of the costs. But now we're going to get into where the real costs are on a restoration, and where there's a lot of variability. So where each restoration is going to have a different cost because of the labor that's involved in the metal polish that we have to do before we get to this metal refinish here, and then the fit and finish of the wood. So let's take a little closer look at that. Okay, to start with, talking about polishing for refinishing, here's how not to do it. This is an 1892 barrel that came in for some mechanical issues, and we've got the barrel off of it, and you can see the edges are just rounded over. This thing was just terribly overbuffed and thrown into a bluing tank. Don't ask us to do that. We will not do that to a gun. It's sacrilege. Let's get it out of view so we don't have to see that anymore. Okay, and next we've got some examples. These we recently color case hardened. These are modern reproduction firearms. This one's a Japanese Moroku 1895, and these are a lever action made by our good friends down the road at Bighorn Armory. They're a large bore 1886 based lever action rifle that they make new there, and we do their color case hardening for them. And you can see these have kind of a matte finish, these modern steels, and it's thought that those bring out the color a little better on some of the modern steels. I'm not sure I'm convinced of that, but certainly it's a less expensive way to polish and finish these things, and it looks good on the modern firearms. But our previous owner would offer that on restorations for vintage firearms, and we no longer do that because the vintage firearms were polished to a much higher polish. So it just isn't correct for those older vintage firearms, and we don't do it anymore. And here's an example of a 85 Winchester that's just come out of the quench, and this one's even still got the oil on it and whatnot. But that's an example of a higher polish. Now, when we talk about going to a higher polish, that's where really is going to make or break the bank on a restoration where we're finishing the metal. Now, here's an example of a 1906 or 1890 receiver. We can see the one side is just horribly pockmarked and pitted, and the other side we've got polished up. And it literally, just on that easy flat side, took several hours of draw filing to get to the bottom of all those pits, because you have to get to the bottom of the deepest pit if you're not pit filling with like a laser welder, and then go through the different grits. So the process here is that we start with something like that, and of course, you know, we don't restore high condition guns. There's no reason to restore a high condition gun. So usually we get them that have issues that we have to start with draw filing. And even a pretty decent looking older gun that needs to be restored is probably going to have some draw filing done somewhere. So we would start off draw filing to the bottom of those pits in one direction. And then we'd start in with a coarse grit of sandpaper with a backer on it, going the opposite direction, or 90 degrees to that direction. It doesn't have to be 90, but we just have to change direction so that we know we've got through all the polish marks or the lines that were made by the previous grit. And of course, draw filing, even with a smooth file, puts some fairly deep grooves in. So we go back now with like 150 grit or 120. We go to a 220 in the other direction until all those polish marks are gone in the previous direction. Then all the way through, like on a receiver like this, to about a 600 grit. And it depends if it's going to be color cased, it's one grit. If it's going to be blued, another. It depends on the process you're going to use to finish. But it takes a lot of time just on a flat surface like this. And then you start talking about these curved surfaces and the edges, trying to keep all those lines straight. We're talking about, even on a firearm that's in pretty darn good condition, much better than this. This wouldn't even be worth doing. This is a test piece. We're talking about hours and hours and hours. Okay, so if we look at then the lower receiver out of that, then we've got all this trigger guard, we've got all these different places, and so it's a fairly easy thing to do when you've got a flat surface like the side of a flat receiver. But then you start adding all these different angles in, and we've really got a long drawn out process, and the rougher the firearm, the more time it takes to polish it out. A lot of people think, well, that's just not all that great of a gun, I'm not that worried about it, you know, if you don't get it polished all the way out. That's not how it works. If we're going to refinish a firearm, we have to get to the bottom of all those pits. We can't just leave pits in it and finish over the top. So if you look at, say, like this flat side receiver on this 1895, you know, it's fairly easy to polish that. If you look at, say, this Moroku 1895 with the dished receiver here, thinking about going on all the different directions in that dish, going through. Now this one didn't really need a whole bunch because it's a modern firearm, but if you've got a original 1895 second model like this that's got some pitting in it, it is a painstaking process to get through all the different grits of sandpaper to the final polish, get the polish in the right direction. And that's where we're really fortunate that we have the Cody Firearms Museum almost next door, where we can go look at original high examples of just about any kind of firearm. Now I just started on this. This is a butt plate off of an 1895, and so you can see how rough that draw filing is, and you can see all those little dark spots are pits, and we've got to get to the bottom. Look at that on here. I've probably got 15 minutes of draw filing in that. We're going to have a good hour of draw filing to get to the bottom of those pits, and I'm probably going to have to TIG weld up probably that one there, and there's a couple of big dings on the edge, and then go ahead and polish everything out. So it's a real challenge. And that's just the rifles. Now, when you start into handguns, you start thinking about all the different angles here on this old Colt Bisley, and then throw in the cylinder to polish all those nooks and crannies and flutes in the cylinder, and all in the proper direction, and keep those lines good and straight and crisp. It is a slow, painstaking process. You can figure on a vintage firearm that's in pretty darn good shape, you're probably talking about 10 hours at minimum, and some as long as 20 hours to get a proper polish through all the grits and ready to go in and have that metal finish applied. So there's where the real cost of the metal refinish is. All right, so we've got this totaled up now, and at this point we're into this full-on restoration at a little under $1,900. And we've talked a lot about the polishing, metal prep here, and it is just a slow process, and there's no shortcuts. I mean, we don't take them over to a buff 'em wheel and buff them out, and that just destroys the collectability of a firearm. So we go through the whole process, and we don't cut corners there, and we won't. We have people ask us, well, can you just stop at this many hours? And it just doesn't work that way. It's all or nothing on metal prep. And so figure, you know, on a firearm that is in pretty good shape and doesn't have a lot of dings and pits and stuff like that, maybe 10 hours minimum on polishing every surface on a rifle. So, and up to, on a rough one, as much as maybe 20 hours. And you know, most restorers are in the $75 to $100 an hour range. So we're looking at, best case scenario, probably about $750 for hand polishing properly, and as much as $2,000. And I've seen, not here, but I've seen this number even higher from some other restorers. So that's not a cheap process. But this is one where you can save yourself some money and do some of that polish work yourself, but it has to be done right. If it's done wrong and it has to be corrected, could end up costing more money. So if you're pretty handy with your hands and are able to follow instructions, we're in the middle of putting together an episode where we're going to show just exactly how to properly hand polish a firearm. So keep an eye out for that. I hope to have it posted here in the next week or two. And that's an area where a person can save a tremendous amount of money, even if they go through a part of it and let us do the finish polish on the outside of the metal prep work. That's an opportunity there. So now we've got that figured out. Now we need to get our wood fit and finished, and that's another one that's pretty labor intensive. So let's take a little closer look at that one. Now let's talk about another area that takes a tremendous amount of skill, patience, and time. And of course, if it takes time, it's an expensive process. And that's fitting and finishing these wood stocks. Now, as I mentioned earlier, most of the time when we have a restoration project, it's not a high condition gun, and the wood's been abused enough that it's not salvageable for a good high quality restoration. And so it's a rare situation where we're able to use that wood over again. So we'll need to fit new wood to it. We get these restorations or these reproduction stocks semi-inletted. In other words, they aren't inletted all the way where they just slide on and fit right up. It takes a lot of handwork to get them to fit up. And if you've seen the rifles from the late 19th and early 20th century, the wood to metal finish is phenomenal. So it has to be done right, and everything has to fit within a few thousandths to look right. Now, of course, we can't just slide them on when they come to us. It's a slow process where we put inlet black on these tangs and any of the mating surfaces, slide them on, see where that black transfers onto the wood, scrape it off by hand, put it, inlet black again on, and so they're on and off and on and off. And there's just, again, it's one of those, like metal polishing, you just can't cut corners. It takes as long as it's going to take. And then when you finally get it to where it fits all the way up onto the tangs, then you have to get the front end to fit up here on the back of the receiver, and so we've got all the angles have to be just perfect. And again, it's just taking a few thousandths at a time off on the high spots where that inlet black, or some people smoke them with a candle, transfers onto the wood. We're just taking a little bit off there, try it again, on and off. And then when we finally get it to where it's matched up, then we start working on shaping the wood. And if you've noticed, most original manufacturers made their wood just a little bit proud to the metal. So not only are we taking this wood down to the surface of the metal, we're leaving a few thousandths of wood above the metal, and it has to be even. So again, you can imagine what a painstaking process that is on all these surfaces to leave that wood just a few thousandths high. And we get that all in, then we get to drill the screw that goes through the stock here, the tang screw, and then we start all over on the butt plate, whatever kind of butt plate it has. We got to start all over on it. We get that done, and then it's time to start in on the fore end. And of course the fore end, the channel is a little bit small, so it has to be, again, inlet black, scraped in, tried again. We got to get everything a little proud here, and this cut completely straight up against that receiver. It is just a slow process. When we get all that done and fitted up properly, then it's time to finish the thing. So once we've gone through the painstaking process of fitting up these stocks, they come over here where we do the final finish. Now we've got some examples here that are getting close to done here of some Winchesters. This is a 94 set over here. There's a 1895 fore end here, and then a set of 85 wood here. And we'll just take a gander at this 85 stock. Now we talked about wood, cost around $275 on average. Of course, if we want wood like this, it's quite a little bit more. Now Tony's done just a marvelous job of fitting this wood to the receiver. The butt plate there's just no gaps anywhere. It's tremendous work, but boy, it takes some time. Now this set is just about done. I think he's just got one more day, but there's just a tremendous amount of time into getting that finish right too. It's every morning comes in and evaluates it. There's sanding to be done. There's hand rub coats. We're filling pores. So it's not like we just take it off of, or take it over here, put a coat or two of varnish on it and call it good. This stock set here from this 85, I'm going to say it's been up here and worked on a little bit each day or two for approximately at least 2 weeks and maybe 3 weeks. So while he doesn't spend a whole lot of time on it each day, it takes a long time to get it to look just like this, and this is just absolutely beautiful. Now, unlike the metal polishing, where I think there's an opportunity to save some money on restoration if you're detail oriented and want to do some of that work yourself, I wouldn't encourage that with fitting these gun stocks. Unless you've got somebody to hold your hand through the process, it's just a skill that most people can't just pick up overnight without quite a little bit of experience and help getting through it. And the most likely result is going to be that you're going to take too much wood off in places, and once you take wood off, you can't really put it back on. So, we might start off with some kind of a little shooter grade and really try to watch some videos that show it, and we're going to produce one here soon to kind of show Tony's whole process for going through and fitting these stocks and finishing them. And of course, it's going to take a long time. It takes weeks to get this through the shop from start to finish. So let's head on over the board and put this piece of the puzzle on there and see where our costs are headed now. Now for the fit and the finish on the wood, and we're talking about a high quality, restoration quality fit and finish where we've got extremely tight tolerances on the wood to metal fit. We've got it just slightly proud and even all the way around, and a high quality finish with pores filled. We're looking at 12 to 18 hours of work. So here we are, wood, fit and finish. So we're at this maybe 850 to say 1800, and usually on the lower end of that, but there's just a lot of man hours involved. So we were at 1800 here. We add in here, and we're at about say around 3,500 on the low end, and that would be a gun that came in pretty good shape, and maybe would try to talk you out of restoring, and up around maybe $6,000 on the high end, and that's just for a basic restoration. You know, if we had fancy wood, cheek piece, pistol grip, checkered stock, engraving, and we can do all of those things here. But again, we're adding a lot of cost. So, you know, we could, if we're going all out with a really highly optioned deluxe checkered engraved type of a rifle, you know, we could easily be up in the $8,000 to $10,000 pretty quickly. But on the other side of that, if we're just looking for a refinish and a blued gun, say it's a Model 65 Winchester that would be all the parts do-lite blued, and we use do-lite bluing salts just like the Winchester started in the early 1930s, then, you know, our metal finish cost is $275 rather than $600. If it's got decent wood and you just want wood refinished, then that goes away. And if the bore's in good shape, it's not a full-on restoration, and we don't need a new barrel, then that goes away. So now we're talking, at this point, we're at $275 instead of $1,800. Of course, our metal prep isn't going to change a lot. You know, there's just not a lot we can do, but again, you can help yourself there if you want to do some of that metal prep work. The wood fit and finish, now you're probably going to want the wood refinished, but we don't have to go through all this fitting process. So, you know, it could be, you know, $200 or $300 to lightly take off some of the existing finish, or maybe just finishing over. So, you know, we say we plug in another 275 here, because that seems to be our trend here is 275s, and then, you know, we're at, what is it, $700-800 to refinish a firearm plus the metal prep. So, you know, if you could do the entire metal prep yourself, we could refinish a firearm from front to back for under $1,000. If we had to do the metal prep, of course, it's going to be significantly more than that, because there's so much labor involved there. Now, not every vintage firearm is a good candidate for restoration. If they're in good original shape, you should just leave them alone. And I'd be happy to tell you that if you bring one in and want me to restore it. You know, you're going to spend a lot of money, and they're probably not going to be worth what they were before the restoration occurred. And on the flip side of that, if they're just a basket case rough firearm, you know, you're going to spend a ton of money to get them to look new again. And unless they're a family heirloom or something really special about them, those are probably ones that you need to just leave on the shelf somewhere. But for those that you want to restore, that are good candidates for a refinish or a restoration, we'd be more than happy to help you with that. And there are a lot of options. Now, I don't want to make it look like there's only, on the one end of the spectrum, a fairly cheap refinish, or a make it look brand new again restoration, because there's a lot of options. And this 86 that we're using as an example today is an excellent example of that, in that this one actually came in for us to do the color case hardening work, which we did. It had already had the barrel and magazine tube caustic blued. I would have preferred to do a rust blue on it. The wood was actually in very good condition, so it was salvageable and looks really good just having it refinished. We can see just very little evidence of its previous life and the bumps and bruises, and it's still the original barrel has a good bore. So here's one that had restoration work, but it's basically a refinish. So there's all sorts of options, and so if you have a gun that you want to have some refinish or restoration work done, talk to the person you're going to have that work done with, whether it's us or somebody else, and discuss all those options. And you know, you can do some of the work yourself if you're comfortable with that, and bring the cost down as well. So I hope you've learned something today about the process and the costs that are involved and what we have to charge to be able to do this and pay our bills when we're certainly not getting rich. So thanks for joining us today. Until next time, happy trails from Cody, Wyoming.